we have come to the end of our conference with our last keynote speaker, Anna Longo. I will now present her. She's a philosopher living and working in Paris. She's program director at the Collège International de Philosophie and affiliated to the LCSP at University Paris-Cité. She has been researching at the crossroad of aesthetics, philosophy of technologies, and contemporary metaphysics. Today, she will present her talk titled A Personal Artwork or a Personal Brand, Identity and Reification, which chases the difference between the construction of the self as a personal brand and the creation of the self as a work of art. Welcome, Anna.
So thank you, Clara, for the presentation. Thanks for this invitation, much appreciated. And thanks also to all the team of the Identity Crisis Network for this wonderful symposium. So what I'm doing is starting from Michel Foucault's concept of the care of the self, then to go through Foucault's reflection on neoliberalism, and then I will try to push it a little bit beyond by talking about the crisis of neoliberalism. So I'm going to start with a quote from Michel Foucault. So what strikes me is the fact that in our society, art has become something that is related only to objects and not to individuals or to life. What strikes me is that art is something which is specialized or done by experts who are artists, but couldn't everyone's life become a work of art? Why should the lamp or the house be an art object, but not our life? End of quote. So Michel Foucault's later researches are dedicated to the practices that allows for shaping one's own life as a work of art. And he calls these practices the care of the self. The care of the self is meant to construct one's own subjectivity in an autonomous way through a careful understanding of the external and internal forces that determine how one behaves and how one thinks. So the care of the self implies the knowledge of oneself, and according to Foucault, the care of the self and the knowledge of oneself have to do with identity. However, it is not a matter of discovering one's identity and as it was something hidden and repressed by imposed social norms. It's not even a matter of imposing to oneself an alternative model or a new law for representing a category. But in fact, as Foucault says, if people think that they have to uncover their own identity and that their own identity has to become the law, the principle, the code of their existence, if the perennial question they ask is, does this thing conform to my identity? Then I think they will turn back to a kind of ethics very close to the old heterosexual virility. Not only we do have to defend ourselves, not only to affirm ourselves as an identity, but as a creative force. End of quote. So according to Foucault, the goal of the care of the self is the expression of a creative force that allows for an ongoing experimentation with identity rather than the simple affirmation of a difference or a singularity. To produce one's own life as an artwork means to manifest a creative drive that is not exhausted in a specific achievement, but which manifests itself in an evolving series of productions. Accordingly, the knowledge of the self consists in an ongoing diagnosis of the forces, internal and external, that try to impose on each other to determine who one is. And this is, of course, a Nietzschean perspective. Foucault was really inspired by Nietzsche. And so it's a matter of enhancing an equilibrated play among forces in such a way to allow for a continuous transformation. So the care of the self does not consist in trying to force oneself into a mold. Rather, it consists in letting the form to emerge according to the qualities of the material and the qualities of the material that we are. So this heterogeneous material made of a lot of different forces. Foucault defines the care of the self as a practice of freedom. And he defines freedom as the possibility of transforming oneself. From this standpoint, freedom does not exist outside the practice of freedom. So freedom coincides with the act of performing freedom, and so making one's own life a work of art is an expression of freedom. And this, of course, reminds me of Hannah Arendt's notion of freedom. That according to her manifests in the political dimension of life. So I quote Anna Arendt, "The appearance of freedom, like the manifestation of principle, coincides with the performing act. Men are free as distinguished from their possessing the gift of freedom. They are free as long as they act, neither before nor after. For to be free and to act are the same." End of quote. Arendt compared the practice of freedom, which is essentially political, according to her, so action for her is politics, to performing arts. I quote, "The performing art share indeed a strong affinity with politics. Performing artists, dancers, play actors, musicians, and the like need an audience to show their virtuosity, just as acting men need the presence of others before whom they can appear. Both need publicly organized space for their work, and both depend upon others for the performance itself. Such a space of appearances is not to be taken for granted wherever men live together in a community." End of quote. So for Arendt, the public stage of democracy is the space where freedom manifests itself as a pluralistic game where people embody ethical principles while providing each other with new ways of shaping their behavior. In this process, the different practices mutually challenge themselves by letting the whole to evolve. However, sadly, she noted that in modern societies, the political space for the expression of freedom is obscured by the aestheticization of politics. The aestheticization of politics happens when there is a mere spectacularization of the public sphere, a spectacularization of political engagement, as it happens, for example, in the choreography of the masses which are orchestrated by the Nazis. We will go back to the aestheticization of politics later. So to go back to Foucault, now we can say that the practice of making one's own life a work of art is political in the sense of Arendt. It is the practice for which freedom manifests itself on the public stage. So Foucault explained that his interest in the care of the self and these practices of freedom was inspired by the social movement of the 60s. For instance, in the movement of May 68, which was really important for Michel Foucault, the political practice of freedom was manifesting itself as a form of resistance against the dominant modalities for producing subjects. He observed that the struggle were assuming a new form as they were now directed against a form of power that produced standardized subjectivities through the repression of any deviation from the norm. And this is the power that he defined, the biopower of the disciplinary societies. In the important paper, The Subject and Power, Foucault describes how this form of power operates in order to turn human beings into given categories of subjects. So this modality are basically two modalities. The first one is through scientific knowledge. Individuals are made objects of knowledge and defined accordingly. For instance, in biopower, individuals are known as biological systems. The second modality is through dividing practices. Examples are the mad and the sane, the sick and the healthy, the criminals and the good boys. Dividing practices are based on binary distinctions, and their goal is to mold individuals into a set of pre-given roles, oppositional roles. And this is the reason why Foucault studies a third modality of producing subjects, which is the care of the self, so the techniques that allow for producing oneself as a subject in an autonomous way. So Foucault noted that the struggles of the minorities in the 60s and early 70s was an effort to define themselves in an autonomous way by resisting against the institutional power of producing normalized forms of subjectivity. He characterizes these struggles in the following way. They are transversal struggles, that is, they are not limited to one country. The aim of these struggles is the power effect as such, and the way in which modes of living are shaped. They are struggles which question the status of the individual. They assert the right to be different, and they underline everything which makes individuals truly individual. They are an opposition to the effect of power, which are linked to knowledge, but they are also in opposition against the mystifying representation imposed on people. Finally, these present struggles revolve around the question, who are we? They are refusal of normative abstractions and refusal of the violence with which they are imposed to anybody while ignoring singularities. So in short, these struggles attack a technique, a form of power, the power of objectivizing and producing subject by imposing a law of truth. So we can now understand why Foucault is critical about minorities which end up in defining their own identity as a law. So because they recreate fixed and normalized categories and impose them to themselves and on the others, while sanctioning any deviation, and this has the effect of preventing any further transformation. So for this reason, Foucault insists that to actually be a practice of freedom, autonomous self-creation should avoid any crystallization of identity into fixed models. In other words, creative forces of social transformation should challenge any kind of reactionary force of normalization. And this entails that we also have to pay attention to the fact that creative forces may transform themselves into reactionary forces. No, for example, when a revolution became an authoritarian regime. So now Foucault is inspired by Nietzsche. For Foucault, the display of opposite forces is what constitutes the dynamism of social life. So from this point of view, power relations are the very fabric of reality. Basically, for Foucault, any kind of relation is a power relation. Power expresses itself as a will to orient the conduct of the other. And power relations are the mutual effect of this free play, where different powers challenge each other. This free game is the source of any transformation. And this is also true, of course, for the relation with the self. So it's a matter of composing and recomposing the different forces or tendency that constitute an individual. Also because for Foucault, the individual is a sort of abstraction, so there is a plurality inside anyone. Hence, freedom cannot be dissociated from the existence of power relation and their unpredictable evolution. So where there are power relations, there is freedom, basically. So for Foucault, power relations are not intrinsically bad. What is bad is when a power relation turns itself into a state of domination. This is happen when one of the forces at play succeeds in determining completely the expression of the other while preventing any deviation from the imposed behavior. In such situation of domination, freedom is abolished and reactive forces triumph by impeding the evolution of individual and collective conducts. In the case of a relation to a self, a state of domination happens when one becomes a slave of a specific passion, or when one imposes to himself a specific identity, so to prevent any further experimentation. However, it is important to situate Foucault's reflections historically, as they were occasioned by the observation of a social movement of the 60s and 70s. As we said, these were struggles against the domination of what Foucault called disciplinary power. Disciplinary societies and their governmental techniques were related to the epoch of industrial capitalism and mercantilism. This mode of organization was undergoing a deep crisis and a profound transformation. Disciplinary societies are the oppressive organization that Foucault described for the most part of his life. As we said, they are characterized by governmental techniques that Foucault named biopolitics and which aim to completely determine the life of the individuals. Here, a powerful state takes care of any aspect of the life of individuals by shaping them according to given models. In disciplinary societies, individuals are molded by apparatuses like hospitals, prisons, factories, schools, etc. So the struggle of minorities that Foucault observed were the symptoms of the crisis of disciplinary societies. They were the symptoms that the dominant reactionary forces were becoming weaker and that social transformation was finally possible. Disciplinary societies were on the point of ending, but a new form of organization was rising with its new techniques of governmentality, and I'm talking about neoliberalism. As we are going to see, neoliberalism took advantage of the will to emancipation and the autonomous self-creation that animated the struggles of minorities. Foucault started dealing with neoliberalism technique of government in his lectures at the Collège de France in 1978-1979. At this point, he became aware that we were transitioning from disciplinary societies to a different kind of organization that was characterized by a new way of objectivizing individuals, as well as by new techniques for orienting their behavior. In his study on neoliberalism, Foucault first observes that the new form of government issued from a crisis of excessive power of the state. It was a matter now of rationalizing government by scaling down. The idea is to reduce the role of the state to that of protecting the fragile mechanism of the market. Hence, the role is to assure the capacity of a rational agent to pursue its own interests in an autonomous way. In some way, we can say that neoliberalism acknowledges the productivity of a free game of power relations, and then, rather than trying to suppress these power relations, this play of forces, governmental techniques consist in organizing the space where individuals can freely challenge their reciprocal conducts. And this space is the market. So the market became the stage where rational agents were free to express themselves under the condition of respecting the rules of economics. The idea was that it was less costly to let individuals to discipline themselves freely than to pay for the gigantic public apparatuses to discipline them. However, it was essential to provide individuals with a new mentality to assure that they would have been disciplined themselves according to the needs of the market. So neoliberalism is based on a new scientific comprehension of humans. They are no more biological systems that must be taken care of, but rational agents that are perfectly capable of taking care of themselves, and that must be incentivized to be responsible for their own satisfaction. According to Foucault, neoliberalism is based on the extension of economic rationality to all the aspects of life. Any kind of behavior is now understood as the effect of an economic calculation that aims at the maximization of utility. As Foucault observes, this form of knowledge makes individuals very predictable, despite the fact that they are left free to make their own decisions. Known and modelized as rational agents that look to obtain the greater satisfaction in any domain of activity, like in family, in leisure, in culture, in profession, etc., free individuals appear to be more governable than individuals that, feeling oppressed by the power of the state, develop hostile feelings and try to revolt. The theory of human capital, which is central in Foucault's studies on neoliberalism, is the consequence of this extension of economic understanding of behavior to all the aspects of life. Gary Baker introduced this theory of the human capital while trying to understand labor from the perspective of the worker, and here the worker is conceived as a rational economic agent. So from the point of view of the worker, according to Gary Baker, the wage is an income, not the price at which he sells its labor power. An income is quite simply the product or return on a capital. So capital is everything that in one way or another is a source of a future income. Consequently, if we accept that the wage is an income, then the wage is therefore the income of a capital. And the capital is the individual himself, so the theory of the human capital. So from this point of view, the worker is revealed as a sort of enterprise of himself. He invests his own resources, such as time or skills, to augment his capacity to provide himself with satisfaction. So the human capital tries to augment itself through a process of continuum self-development that allows for improving and evolving the conducts. So a human capital consider any kind of activity as a way for increasing its own capital. So things like education, culture, work, etc. And as entrepreneurs of themselves, individuals work for increasing their own agency, their own capacity, in order to challenge each other in a competitive market. The mentality or the subjectivity of the entrepreneur of himself was created by the new form of knowledge of the individual as a rational economic agent, and it was imposed to individuals to give rise to a new form of subjectivity, that of the human capital. For instance, the diffusion of a psychology like psychologies of self-improvement and personal development might be seen as technique for enforcing this new mentality. Neoliberal governments developed so new techniques for creating responsible entrepreneurs for themselves, agents capable of taking care of themselves rather than relying on costly social programs. And this, of course, is functional to cut the public's expenses. And so, for instance, programs for the unemployed people are transformed into services to help people to help themselves. So rather than give the unemployed some money, they help the unemployed to acquire new skills, so to increase their value on the labor market. And another example is the replacement of public health programs with private insurances. And this pushes individuals to feel personally responsible for their behaviors and their choices. So accordingly, neoliberal governmental techniques push people to discipline themselves according to economic rationality, with the effect of improving the productivity of a market which is now based on services rather than on industrial production. While thinking to be finally free to take care of their personal development through the different costly services which are available to empower them, individuals are actually shaped according to the dominant subjectivity of the human capital. Once imbued with this mentality, individuals appear to be governable without the need of constraining them to make specific decisions, since it's now the whole space for the practice of freedom which is carefully organized. If agents can be left free to make decisions for themselves, it's because their choices are made predictable by the fact that they will act according to the economic rationality of the human capital, and that they will choose between given alternatives. Within the framework of neoliberal knowledge, the demand of minorities for self-determination finds an illusory satisfaction in the generalized competition for social recognition and self-valorization. So the will to autonomous realization is turned into an effort for valorizing one's own human capital within a generalized competition for success and realization. So I think that Foucault dedicated the last part of his life to the antique practices for the care of the self, to provide people with alternatives to the neoliberal doctrine of entrepreneurial self-development and self-challenging. However, today, at the time of social media and of a general crisis of neoliberalism, the situation has been rapidly changing with major consequences of the techniques for subjectivation. The crisis of neoliberalism is evident if we think of the multiple critiques that are addressed from different sides and different angles. For instance, neoliberalism is criticized for the drastic reduction of public programs, which were meant to help marginalized category of human capital. Another critique of neoliberalism attacks the individualistic drive of the entrepreneur for himself, and the consequential erosion of a sense of community. Both the critiques find expression in social media, where people have the possibility of recreating communities which are inspired by values of solidarity and sharing that challenge the rationality of the human capital. At the time of social media, we could have the impression that the public space described by Arendt as a theater for performing freedom has been realized. We might feel that platforms provide us with the possibility of creating communities that identify themselves with values, practices, and modes of living that challenge the neoliberal organization of the space for exchange and interaction. Social media seems to provide individuals with the possibility of experimenting new ways of relating to each other that better conform to their affective needs that couldn't find satisfaction under neoliberalism. However, despite the undeniable advantages of social media, it seems to me that they also expose us to the risk of aestheticization of politics. It seems to me that the risk is entailed by the rise of a new market for information, where identities are commercial products that compete for influence. Within this framework, I suggest that a new form of subjectivity is substituting the subjectivity of a human capital, which is the subjectivity of a personal brand. In the same way that neoliberalism turned the emancipatory drive of the 60s and the 70s into a will for a personal realization, which was in line with the needs of post-industrial societies, now capitalism is diverting the desire to build communities into the construction of commercial surrogates of communities. And brands are such surrogates of community that conforms to the need of a financialized economy, which is based on the production and the consumption of information. Brands are the form of subjectivity produced by the financialization of everyday life, to quote Randy Martin, and the products that satisfy the market for information. A brand is not exactly an enterprise. The goal of a letter is to increase the returns determined by the investment for optimizing the production of material objects. Instead, a brand is an image, a character, or a personality that look for people to identify with it. To produce this identification, a brand constructs itself as an embellishing mirror where individuals who are excluded from the identification with the most prized groups can contemplate an empowering image of himself. A brand is interested in constructing itself as a person who embodies particular values, a style, a perspective on the world. The merchandises which are associated with a brand are considered as form of expressions of a peculiar and recognizable personality. And the proof is that often the construction of the image of the brand precedes the choice of the products to be commercialized. A brand does not seek for clients by advertising the qualities of the products or the services that it provides, but a brand asks people to buy a model for expressing their identity. Accordingly, the proposed merchandise is just tools for manifesting one's authentic being in a more appreciable way. The followers of a brand recognize themselves in idealized communities that valorize their singularity, and this produces a sense of belonging. Coming together under a brand image, individuals feel more confident in the possibility of valorizing their peculiarities, and they feel that together they can acquire the power to challenge official representations. Brands construct themselves by making the effort of bringing isolated individuals into a collective identity that reflects their specificities in an empowering image. The influence of a brand corresponds to this power of enhancing identification while contributing to the valorization and the recognition of a community. Communication is an essential strategy, and marketing is the science that allows for the construction of a successful brand. Today, social media apps and platforms provide individuals with the possibility of constructing themselves as brands, the possibility of becoming the representative image of a community, and the possibility of producing a spread identification with the model that they propose. Accordingly, we could think that social media provide the public space for the manifestation of freedom by allowing people to make of their own identity a performance that challenges and transforms the expression of the others. From this perspective, as we said, social media seem to provide the space for acting politically in the sense of Arendt. However, it is important to clarify that concerning brands, the term of valorization has a precise financial meaning. Brands are different from enterprises also for the economic model. While an enterprise aims at the revenues generated by the sale of products, a brand aims to increase the values of the shares in the interest of the investors. A brand needs to prove its creditworthiness. It needs to attract investments rather than to increase the returns. The amount of the sold item of a brand are just the indicator of the creditworthiness of a brand. So a brand does not invest its own capital to increase it, but it sells itself as a project, as a seducing image that must convince potential investors. The existence of a brand is conditional on trust. It depends on its capacity to create for itself a good reputation. The financial value of the shares depends, in fact, on the opinion of the market, that is, on the reputation of the brand. And as we know, in financial markets, a rumor can determine a rapid decrease in the value of a share of a financial product, while the demonstration of attachment and trust can occasion a rapid increase. The decisions of investors are based on speculation that the shares will rise their value, and these expectations are based on the perception of a general appreciation of a brand, its capacity for producing identification. An investor or a shareholder has to make sure that other investors will be confident in investing, and this confidence is measured according to the influence of a brand. At the era of data analysis, the value of a brand can be exactly calculated according to the indicators of popularity, affection, and engagement. The quantification of a brand's reputation and influence entails a constant evaluation that has the effect of modulating and orienting the expressions and the behavior, according, of course, to the interest of the investors, of the shareholders. Now, platforms providers are the main investors in the individual projects of personal brands. Everything we said, in fact, applies also to the personal brands who are the individuals. An influencer, for instance, constructs himself as an image capable of producing collective identification and capable of valorizing a community. The worth of a personal brand is constantly quantified and measured, and these measurements, quantification, determine the investments that platforms or commercial brands are available to make in order to valorize their own image and increase their own influence. So to put it otherwise, the valorization of a personal brand is functional to the valorization of the commercial brands that support them, as well as of the platform that hosts them. So the system of evaluation constrains and organizes the space of expression of brands. So a brand must conform to the criteria of credit worthiness. It has to behave according to the expectation of the followers that invest their time and energy to be valorized in return. The criteria for judging the value of a brand are given, and the price influence, which is the capacity of deserving trust and producing identification. Credit worthiness is the correlate of a brand capacity to successfully compete against other brands for creating new, enlarging, and economically productive communities. Communities that affirm themselves as competitive merchandise in this market for identities. So being themselves brands, platforms look to construct larger communities of users and to expand their influence on subjectivation. For instance, the social platform X is a brand that provokes the affection of particular kinds of community which recognize themselves in the advertised values. And for this reason, many groups and personal brands decided to migrate to other platforms, rather than X, which are more in line with their own identity. Now the brands of platforms are in an aggressive competition on global scale for the monopoly of the market for constructing communities and identities. I would say that the dream of a brand is the control of the space of the market for subjectivation. In order to increase their value, brands aspire to extend their influence to the global community. And for this reason, they compete against each other by displaying reciprocally destructive strategies. It is through the mechanism of evaluation that conducts are oriented toward an extreme and aggressive competitiveness. Since resources such as money, but also time, attention, and affection are limited, the existence of a brand depends on its capacity to direct these resources to itself, and also the capacity of diverting these resources from the adversaries. As the existence of a brand depends on influence and reputation, brands are pushed to display tactics of persuasion and manipulation. In this situation, positive values are often part of a strategy for enhancing the identification of whom feel isolated, marginalized, and oppressed, in such a way to exploit their distress for increasing influence. To construct oneself as an engaged and a socially responsible brand is today a usual strategy that allows for the identification of who want to be recognized as good people, in opposition, of course, to the enemies, which considered to undermine their reputation and existence. Today, the explosion of moralistic propaganda for value is part of a general tendency toward the aestheticization of politics. On social media, what sells is the image of political engagement. Here, the form of political engagement assumes the form of a normative behavior for a community. And moreover, a behavior that the community would like also to impose to all the other communities by sanctioning any deviation from the given model of a good citizen. And we have a plurality of models of a good citizens. So anybody at any time risks to be excluded from its own community for compliance with the adversaries. In a system where resources are limited and unequally distributed, brands are put into a situation of competing for credit worthiness, not only through strategies of self-valorization, but also techniques of discreditation of the adversaries. In this context, anybody is for anybody else a severe moral judge whose sentences have a direct impact on reciprocal reputation. Anybody is constantly evaluating the personal advantages of being identified with a specific community while constantly monitoring the other viable options. Moreover, anybody is constantly trying to increase the value of the community identifies with by criticizing the attitude, the values, and the beliefs of the competitors to make their financial value to decrease. The climate of insecurity enhances aggressiveness as well as polarization. This warlike situation makes it indispensable for anybody to engage in social media, to be part of a powerful community, so to be able to fight the communities that damage their reputation. The winners in this competition are the brands of the information industry, whose shares do not cease to rise in value for the greater satisfaction of the elite of their shareholders. So in this situation, we need more than ever techniques for escaping the subjectivity of a brand, the subjectivity of a personal brand, as well as to escape the knowledge of individual produced by the science of marketing. We need more than ever techniques of care of the self that allows us to make of our life a real work of art rather than a brand. Now it seems to me that the difference between a personal artwork and a personal brand is that a brand is a mere representation of political engagement. A brand sells an aestheticized image of political action that one can buy to valorize himself while identifying with a specific community. Differently, a personal artwork is the expression of a creative force that challenges any crystallized group identity and that resist against binary distinctions, the binary distinction of the good and the bad, the criminals and the good boys. While brands create communities defined by codified values, beliefs, and practices that aim to monopolize the space of collective expression, personal artworks allow for putting into question any codified identity to open towards new experimentation. Thank you for your attention.
Anna, thank you so much for this talk. For me personally, it was really interesting, and I have so many questions. But maybe I would like to start with something kind of that struck me the most, that I'm interested in, is as you talked about brands and relatability, and what is kind of happening with owning a product as a tool to create this individuality, to perform this freedom, and to somehow owning this certain brand as a ticket to enter a certain group of people, which you mentioned as would be some kind of a community. I would maybe even better say like a club, because when you say community, I feel like someone that takes care of each other in some way. But to me, this would actually be maybe to be a part of a certain aesthetic, because there is this rise of aesthetics in social media. And I don't know, maybe this, I can give like a very banal example. Maybe before social media, this certain like trying to fit into a group would maybe be the books you read or the music you listen to. But now it is kind of this curated individual, but based almost purely on aesthetics and the visual. So maybe I would like for you to maybe elaborate on this and to hear your thoughts on this part of on how you think this is it came to it, and in terms of this performing freedom and creation of the self. So sort of curating the self in a way.
So yeah, of course, I observed a lot with aesthetics on social media, all the different cores, no, that emerge, and of course, there are kind of collective identities which emerge, and they manifest through a specific aesthetics. So they make themselves recognizable in some way, and it's a way of expressing, you know, the self-expressing an identity, and I think that what is interesting here is that it's no more a kind of individualistic conception of identity, but it's a kind of collective conception of identity, you know, which is constructed. So because I think the brand is not just something which is created without any study of people, of feelings of people, of affection, of desires of people, but they are co-created in some way. So any real brand is co-created with the public, with people, and the operation is really a dialogue, no? Because the brand has the feedback of the comments and the reviews, etc. And so it can modify itself with respect to the desires of people, and we arrive to a really collective form of individuation, of identity. And I think that the aesthetics are kind of the same thing, no? And they are emerging in some way from above, and everything would be nice if all this wouldn't be able to stay at the laws of the evaluation. So the problem is the system of evaluation. In this case, it's because of the algorithm, no, in some way. So one has to be careful to be in order to exist as a community, one has to conform to certain criteria. Otherwise, the community cannot exist. So it's a war for existence in some way. And of course, once the law of the evaluation, which is dominating, the space of the expression of freedom is organized, so it's limited, no? So it's like we have that public space, but the public space is controlled by somebody, so it's no more the public space of democracy, no? Because you can express, but you can express within these rules, and these rules as the space which is provided by the private enterprise. So that's why I think there is an exploitation of this desire for creative collective identities, which I think is really positive. No, so it's really something which is coming as a criticism of neoliberalism. No, this individualism of the neoliberal subject, and now we have it's no more the individual for himself, but we are collective identities, no, and we create ourselves, we produce ourselves little by little in a evolving process, no, but this is exploited by the system of evaluation, which constrains the space for the expression.
Yes, and another thing to kind of add on, so this, as you said, like a community needs to somehow sustain itself. So there is this care that is needed. And you talked about this kind of increasing our own capacity. So I thought that like this recent kind of, I guess I could call it the trend of self-care is really kind of interesting in this sense where all the care is in some sense completely sold to the individual, and kind of thinking about how much self-care we would need to do daily according to these brands and these individuals and the influencers and everything that is kind of being sold to us, it would actually take up all of these, all of the free time that we do have to kind of perform this freedom. And you also said that, as you talked, that there kind of, this is a question of audience. So when one performs this self-care and perform it in their own time, only according to what they have seen, it is, I don't know, interesting to me that this is being kind of done in front of themselves as the audience. So I don't know, maybe it's just a thought that kind of, does it make sense in this that we are all kind of performing this for ourselves, basically, to feel like we are like increasing this capacity to be a part of this community, but the community is sometimes never even interacted with, in a sense, right? Only through social media, only online, but not kind of directly being a part of this sort of community.
Yeah, so about the techniques for the care of the self, I think that it's also the so the Foucauldian care of the self, no, in some way has been turned into something else, which is taking care, no, of oneself, which is not the care of the self in the sense of Foucault, no, because for Foucault it was a kind of ascetic discipline, an ethos, no. Anyway.
Oh yes, sorry. I another thing related to this question is that I wanted to sort of connect this to role playing also. So yes, also commenting on that.
Yeah, so because also we are in a moment where actually identity is the performance of identity. So there is no more distinction between who we are and who and the role we play. Meaning that also the fact of brand, for example, it works because the expression of one's identity as a performance means to express the self through, for example, some garments or through some practices or like makeup, or and it's a performance which is telling who we are. So we are telling who we are through the practices, through what we buy, what we eat, what we consume. So also consumption is an expression of identity, because before consumption was because of needs. So we had some needs and desires, so we acquire things. But today we do not acquire things, we express ourselves through things. So there is a continuous performance of who we are. So I think that the concept of identity also changed for this reason. And of course we can say, okay, yes, it's role playing. Then I don't know if identity has ever been something else than role playing in some way. What for me is different today is that there is an identity which is a continuous performance. So what we do is to be recognized as. So we are no more who we think we are, but we are who the other thinks we are. And we display things in order to be recognized as a specific identity by the others. So the identity is in the eye of a beholder in some way.
And what do you, I was also curious if you have any kind of examples on, as you finished your presentation, on kind of making a real work of art of ourselves.
But I don't think that, I mean, there are specific examples. It's just like for Foucault, no? It was a way of trying to orient one's own life in an autonomous way, no? Try to not embody the subjectivity of a personal brand, but try to resist no, to it and try to find personal kind of practices which does not correspond to the criteria of financial evaluation, no, of the worth of what we do or what we are.
Yes, no, I understand, but it seems it is so intertwined in life, contemporary life. It seems very hard to navigate.
Yeah, of course, like, as always, no?
Of course. Yes. Okay, thank you. Any questions? Many questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Anna. It was very interesting. I'm just curious whether you think that your observations are universal or they are more kind of attached or belonging to some geographies. Because I will explain. When we speak about capitalism, it's global. But when we speak about freedom, it's not so much, an attribute or something what is kind of available to people. And even more, what I observe personally and how I feel now, for example, about what is going on in public sphere in Russia or in discussions, is that people don't want to be free. They choose, because freedom also means responsibility still. And I think that this brand which you are describing, for example, in this case, it's Putin himself, or for example, for Belarus, it's Lukashenko. I even remind these lines from song that Putin versus Lenin, Lukashenko Margiela, but these brands are not like, this is not something what makes the, people identify with them. It's for outsiders. And people just, for example, in Russia, they just choose not to be free. Moreover, they choose to die. And it's something very, like, we can speak about performative identities on social media and so on, but there is like really huge amount of people who would choose to die just not to take responsibility and not to kind of accept even the very idea of being free, for example, which means sometimes to go to prison. So like rejecting freedom also, but in different way. So I'm thinking like, do you think, do you somehow relate to this, and how, like, I even don't know what is exact question, but I'm thinking how to, how to expand your ideas and your observation into this kind of disturbing tendencies.
Yeah, so basically, to go back to the definition of freedom by Hannah Arendt, for her, that was possible in, I mean, this expression of freedom in the public sphere. It was something in the ancient Greece and at the beginning of democracy. And she was persuaded that that kind of democracy was not actual anymore. So was not real. It's not. And that political expression in democracy is the exception, it's not the rule. So, and in some way, in societies, most of the time, people prefer not to be free, or it's a free choice of. And I think that the same in some ways is happening. Well, in some countries, happening in a more evident way, but it's also happening in the Western part of the world. And that's the reason why I was talking about the aestheticization of politics. So there is an aestheticization of politics under explicitly authoritarian regimes, but there is also an aestheticization of politics in social media, where all the politics that we make is just the representation of the character of engaged person, but it's not real political engagement. It's just to sell the image of oneself as an engaged person. So I'm not talking about universal freedom as a reality. I'm just saying that because the situation is so serious, it's important to think about the possibility of expressing freedom. And Foucault, of course, was not somebody who was saying, okay, you need to make the revolution, you have to revolt, etc. For him, the practice of the care of the self was a sort of personal discipline of expression of freedom. It was day by day, it was in the little things. It was in reading, it was in trying of writing, it was in trying to think. It was the construction of an ethic, a personal ethic. It doesn't need to be to manifest in some gigantic way. The space that we have to because there are always power relations. So the idea is that till we are alive, we have some power. We are some force. The idea is to try to understand what is the space of action, because a force is always against another one, no? So it's tried to find in any kind of situation, in any kind of regime, which are the possibilities that we have to change a little thing to make a move which was not anticipated, or to find possibility for deviating, no, from the rules which are imposed. So, and I think this is available everywhere for anybody in some way.
Thank you. I will not ask more questions. I have them, but
Boris, and then you, okay? I think I have a quick question, and uh, I have a problem with this, like personal artwork or personal brand, because in arts, artwork is an act of simple proclamation. This is art. You don't have to do anything. You can just proclaim that something is art. And you, as a second person, you don't have any tools to negate that it's not art. This is what we know since Dada, let's say. With personal brand, we have a quite long history of artists signing banknotes. There's three most famous acts: Pablo Picasso, Joseph Beuys, and Andy Warhol. So the name is the currency, and this is something what we know since 1920s. So actually, there is absolutely no division in between the brand and the artwork, because the artwork is the brand and the brand is the artwork. And this is very classical, because this is 2 centuries before Christ. It's Paulus and Persa with nomen omen, with the trade of the sex worker of high reputation, and her name was Lucris, and lucrative, and income comes from her name. So tell me why you divide the artwork from the brand.
I'm not talking about artworks like objects, art objects. I'm talking about Michel Foucault's idea that why we don't create our life as a work of art. It doesn't mean that we have to go in a gallery or in a museum to be exposed.
Yes, but exactly, I exactly say that. I mean, even the early modernist practice of like what is artwork, even life, is actually it's not nothing fine. It's just like this. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, there is the idea also in the artwork about the fact of making of life a work of art. But I'm talking about the Foucault's idea, which is okay. We're artists to do things, but for him to make a personal artwork or to make of oneself a work of art, it was not something that only the artist could do. It's something for everybody. Then of course, in the world, in the art world, artists are brands in some way. And for example, Andy Warhol was a big brand in some way. And I think that the art world anticipated also this idea, no, of brandification of subjectivity in some way, in the same way as it was anticipated, the art world anticipated many other things. Then of course, I don't think that, I mean, maybe we can say, okay, Andy Warhol was the first influencer. Maybe. But it doesn't make of an influencer an artwork.
No, I mean, anyone can be an artist if he decides so. And again, we know it since 1916, let's say, with Freitag Lothringhoven and other people who were self-proclaimed. In 1937, the American pragmaticist John Dewey writes the book which is called Art as Experience. And he already speaks about that if we just move something from one place to another, this is the matter of commodification. Something that we change one object, the neutral object, to the object of art.
Yeah, but anyway, for Foucault, it was not
Sure.
everybody to be an artist. It was just a matter of allowing anybody to make something of oneself in an autonomous way. So to be an author, to be the author of one's own life.
Yes, so I mean, his idea is pretty first half of 19th century, actually.
Yeah.
Thank you, Luca. Hi. I really liked your presentation. I thought it was really inspiring. And I wrote down some of the things that you said that I want to ask you about. I'm gonna try to be brief. So you said that there's this continuous performance of who we are, and that there is no difference between performing and being, in a way, right? Like this was now in the conversation that you had with Clara, and it's interesting because I think about this often, and I'm trying to kind of understand if this is really true. So I would maybe ask you, like, what about some situations where, for example, identities are not visible, or like when they're obscured by different realities, you know, like some of the identities that are maybe misperformed or misunderstood or maybe completely invisible to the neoliberal eye, for example. Or what about, I don't know, like psychosis, or like, you know, people who are, you know what I mean? Like maybe there's no, this is maybe applicable like in a general sense, but when you think about like the different versions of the self, maybe maybe it's not really the same thing to perform and to be. But yeah, I guess that's the question for you.
Yeah, but I think that the correspondence between the performance at the being is an effect of the specific kind of knowledge of today. So because techniques of subjectivation goes with techniques of objectivation. So today we are actually known, so our identity is discovered or is determined by what we do. So for example, everything we do online, what we like, what we watch, the things that we post or whatever, any action is an expression of who we are. And this is the way in which we are known. So there is a kind of knowledge of the individual that that is produced through the expression of identity. So watching a movie is already telling who we are, and this is a form of knowledge which is diffused today, and we are known in this way. So we conform also to this way of being known, no? In the same way as in other, for example, in the study by Foucault on madness, madness was basically produced together with the mad people, because there was a new way of producing a knowledge of a subject, of objectifying them, no? And there are, for example, a lot of mental illnesses which does not exist anymore. For example, hysteria was a kind of epidemic at a certain point, and now it disappeared. Because there are also techniques of knowledge which are different, no? And I think that today we are known through the actions, through what we do, through the performance of the self is a performance because we are known in this way. And I don't think that there are invisible identities because an algorithm can try to predict the behavior of also a psychotic person, no problem. It will find, it will be maybe more difficult to find the right triangulation, but I don't think that anybody can escape. Then, of course, there are communities or there are kinds of identity which are more influent than others, so they are more visible than others. And this is, of course, the fact that there is also a competition for influence among identities that not anybody can be the winner. So of course, and there are many identities who are trying to be more visible than what they are. Yeah.
Thank you. Just one small note.
Yeah.
I guess just maybe the word performance for me is interesting in this, because I guess you're not performing if you're mentally ill. You know, like that was kind of the thing that I was trying to address.
Yeah, maybe you are not performing your illness, but maybe you are trying to perform something else. No, I mean, you are not performing your illness, but you behave. You have some behaviors. No, you also do normal things when you are mentally ill. No, it's not just that you are. If you are unable to conduct your own life, of course you are not performing nothing. You are not. So it's not voluntary. Because we have to make the distinction, no, between what is a strategy which is elaborated in some way and what is not. So if somebody has not a strategy, probably is escaping from this brandification in some way. But as long as we are able to put up some strategies, I think that we are. Then, yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, I don't want to take more of your time. Thanks.
Hi, thank you. I wanted to say that that was a really interesting lecture, and thank you for giving it this background in Foucault, because that was really throughout. And I also think this notion of example that Vera brought into the question of the different cultural context of performing identity in, for example, in Russia is really interesting, and I will think about it. But I wanted to ask about the role of platform, because we obviously, to conduct these identities or to perform them, we need the platforms. So is this like personal artwork a project of deplatformization? So obviously we cannot, the idea is like, do we actually refuse this visibility that comes with using platforms as, you know, social media platforms, etc., and whether we need to think about this like deplatformization, or in order to kind of carry out this this personal artwork, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. So no, I don't think that we need the platforms to perform. It's just that platforms allow us to perform better in a more efficient way. But of course, we make the same performance also offline, if we are offline sometimes. That's the problem, no. But I don't think that the space outside the platform is ruled by other rules. Yes, they are the same. Because now, I mean, everything we do also in our personal life is this performance of an identity. The fact is that identity became a performance. And of course, platforms and social media are very adapted to this. But it's not that the fact that identity is a performance is caused by social media, is that the technology of social media is adapted to the new kind of subjectivity which emerged, which is emerging. Because I actually think it's emerging. I don't think it's something which is established and universal and everywhere. I think we are assisting to a transition from a subjectivity which was the neoliberal subjectivity of a human capital to a new form of subjectivity, which I call the personal brand. Just observing, trying to observe and try to catch something which is emerging now, which I don't know exactly, you know. But just to try to grasp it in some way. But I don't think that the cause of this are the social media. I think the social media are the effect. It's because there was this kind of new form of subjectivity that social media are so important today because they really adapt to this. If you want to know what for me is the cause of this new subjectivity of the of a personal brand is the it's financial economy. Because the mentality of a brand really is the model which is imposed by a notion of an enterprise which is no more the classic enterprise for production, but which is an enterprise which is focused on increasing the value of the shares. So today, the goal of enterprises is to raise the values of the shares, and the behavior is totally different from the behavior of an enterprise who has to sell products. It's totally different. And I think that the subjectivity of a personal brand is coming from this conception of financialized enterprise. And social media are adapted to that because they can make the evaluation which is perfect for this kind of quantification, no? Because it's difficult to to measure the financial value of a share because it's based on opinion of the markets, it's based on reputation. It's something which is not based on concrete data, no? It's based on speculation. So there is Keynes, for example, who says that in financial market, the rule is that of the beauty context. And he says you have to vote for the girl that you think that most of the people will think that is the most beautiful. For financial value is the same. You have to invest in what you think that the other will think that it will be the best investments. And of course, to make this evaluation, social media are perfect. The algorithm is perfect because they can measure the opinion of people in a good way. But they are the tools. I think that the subjectivity is linked to the need of financial economy.
Okay. I was just thinking that certain kind of identities are more visible and more promoted, exactly as you say, because of financial capital online. So I was thinking whether we need to think about if this personal artwork is then becoming something that does not need this sort of like notions of visibility of maybe this was the invisible identity that was kind of discussed here before. So how to actually how to stage this personal artwork if we are all submitted under this like algorithmic manipulation of identities, or certain identities are more visible online, they are more like you have higher reputation, you have higher value, etc. So whether we need, for example, a sort of community, alternative social media, where this financial capitalization is sort of not run through Google, etc. That's what I was basically thinking, but that's maybe an open question, and I don't know if I formulated it correctly, but yeah.
Yeah, but I don't think that. I mean, it's like when Foucault was writing, no, in at the end of the 60s or the beginning of the 70s. Of course, he didn't think that there was a real way of escaping completely. And it's not a matter of escaping completely on try to make a revolution or to say, okay, we since there is a disciplinary society, we cannot do nothing else than to obey. The idea was, okay, we try in our personal life, this is why he's talking about the care of the self, because it's a personal thing. It's a kind of ethic, it's day by day. One is trying to understand what are the forces, external forces who are determining the identity, and try to oppose them in some way, to construct in self in a more autonomously, but the complete autonomy is not possible. We cannot escape the context where we are. So it's a play of forces because we are in a context where are forces, and we are free because we are in a field of forces. And there is no possibility of extracting oneself from a situation because we were just death. No, so we are in a situation which is a situation which is constituted by power relations. So the idea is to try to do what is possible to orient one's own conduct in some way, being aware of what are the forces at play. But of course, it's not a matter of escaping from the situation. That's not possible.
I've got the mic. Anna, I really enjoyed your paper immensely, and I'm curious about the kind of, I don't think I've got this absolutely right, but the idea that it might be a bit monolithic and there might be grey areas between the performance and expression of the self and the care of the self, the technologies of the self, and there might be a role for performance, for an image of the self that does produce a kind of a certain amount of freedom. And one of the reasons I say that, because I think for Foucault, as well as it being an ethics, practices, as you say, writing, meditation, friendship, a whole series of practices of the self, as you say, daily practices. It's also an aesthetics, isn't it? It's an aesthetics of living. And I think at one point he references Baudelaire and the dandy, for example. And there's certainly something with the dandy which is, clearly expressive and performance. And so I think he had an eye on that, even though those other practices were quite, not secretive, but they were personal, they were kind of conducted in private, except for friendship. But my suspicion, and I'm wondering about your opinion about this, is that there is a place for the performance of a self and for this image function, production of a fiction somehow. That might happen online, actually. So it's really, I suppose it's really positing that there's grey areas between the rather monolithic setup of social media and the practices of care of the self.
Yeah, of course, the dandy can be considered as a sort of precursor of the influencer in some way. And Foucault was talking about the dandy and also about the painter of modern life by Baudelaire, Charles Baudelaire. And this painter of modern life actually had a specific discipline, with this attitude of modernity, he was embodying in some way. And of course, it was a performance of a self. And I think that it's true that the care of a self is also a performance of a self, meaning that it's the construction of an ethic, of a discipline, of a way of behaving. So it's not outside the behaviors. It's a practice. It's action. It's a daily practice.
So involved an image function, and is there also the performance or a projection of an expression in an image?
Yeah, then maybe for Foucault himself, I don't know, because he had these examples, like the dandy or Baudelaire, but then I think that Foucault himself was practicing this care of the self. So I think I'm reading the writing of Foucault like his own practice of the care of the self, the discipline that is imposed to himself in order to be able to think in an autonomous way, to orient his own thought autonomously. And of course, it was not an image; it was more writing, But there was this up. So it's. Then for me, what is problematic is that the Foucault practice of the care of the self today is much more difficult than before, because we have this kind of simulacra of the care of the self. And it's like there was a sort of metabolization of the discourses of thinkers like Foucault, but also Deleuze and other philosophers, and so they became the official discourse in some way, you know. So they are repeated. So in order to say, okay, we are emancipated, we say, okay, we are emancipated according to the model of Foucault, according to the model of Deleuze, etc. So, so we also have to think that there are forces which are determining who we are, which are the Foucault's theory and Deleuze's theory and other theories who are becoming forces producing subjectivity in some way. So I think also we have to pay attention to that. And I think that the problem is that we are produced as subjects according to the Foucauldian theory in some way. But we have to think that this force is a force which is conditioning us now. So we have also to get free from that, to think other ways of becoming autonomous subjects.
Thank you for this really excellent talk. Yeah, I mean, I could ask like 5 questions, but I will just stay with one. And because like how I see it when it comes to attention economy, these brands provide kind of extra access to a specific thing, like, I know, emotions, resources, enjoyment. So it's all about performativity is a way to get access through this surplus. And normally, especially in this kind of context related to art, we normally talk about it in terms of becoming, and becoming is every time affirmed. But when it comes to the market, the problem becomes that because it happens in a market, it's connected to capitalism, we are suspicious to this type of becoming. We immediately kind of think it's inherently immoral or exploitative. And because of that, like, we have more negative lens, or we begin with critiquing it, whereas in a different setting that is, I know, like this one, we are more affirmative to becoming. But the problem in this kind of setting arises that here becoming is more constrained within a specific discursive landscape, whereas in the market space there's no true discursive landscape that is kind of regulating which becomings are permitted and which are not. And that's why I believe that becoming nowadays is becoming increasingly antisocial, or it's leading to the processes of fragmentation, precisely because becoming gives this extra access, and in that way circumvents the desire of the other, precisely because, like, attention mechanism is in that way hijacked by the identity that performs becoming in increasingly extreme ways. So in that way, like, becoming is in a sense autonomous and outside of any kind of attempts to truly regulate it. And yeah, I know that this is more of a comment than a question, but I would be interested in like, why should we because there's obvious progression from Foucault, like how you started the talk with this entrepreneurial self, and then it becomes a brand and more directly connected to financial capitalism and so on. And like, do you also see like some new opportunities or maybe a different kind of vantage points to tackle these questions that don't immediately start within this critical interpretation that also is how Foucault started in this care of the self, returning to ancient Greece. But maybe like if you have like an alternative reading that is like that potentially frames it in a more neutral kind of way.
I don't know if I understood the question. Sorry, I'm a bit tired. So first, I don't think that this autonomy means to extract oneself from the context, from the community, from relations. It's not at all that, because it's impossible. It's just an illusion. When one thinks to be completely autonomous and independent on the situation is just an illusion. So, and the idea is that together with the personal conducts are also the relations with others, which changes. So to choose the personal behavior or personal conduct means also to transform a way in which we relate to other people. So I don't think that there is a kind of antithesis between the fact of taking care of the self and be part of social society or of a community or of a group. Of course, the idea is to make groups to become, not to make groups and community to evolve, rather than having communities which are crystallized, to have a possibility to having communities where the input of different participants allows for a transformation. Then, of course, this is also the mechanism through which a brand works, because a brand is always a continuous operation of marketing, so branding and rebranding. And rebranding is made with the help of a feedback from the people who participate into a community. For example, for the TV series, now the spectators are really making the brand of a TV program, because they identify, and there is a continuous feedback, and when there is a progressive transformation in some way. So for me, this is really challenging. So what I'm saying is not the definitive theory of, I'm not explaining things. I'm just creating a problem. So I'm saying, okay, things are changing now. We are kind of in a moment of a crisis of neoliberalism. We analyze the techniques of government, the governmental techniques of neoliberalism, and these techniques are not working anymore. They are being substituted by other kind of techniques. And I think that we have to understand what these techniques are. I did not understand completely what they are. I'm trying to. So what I'm trying to do is to say, okay, let's try to see what is constraining and what the new form of governmentality is, what is the new form of subjectivity is. Let's try to understand this. And I think that the first step is to try to understand where we are, the situation in where we are. What are the forces at play? What is conditioning us? How we are determined to be? Who is saying who we are? I think that the important thing is first to understand the present situation. And with respect to the present situation, the work would be, okay, what I can do in this situation? What are the strategies which are possible, if some strategy is possible? And okay, my goal for the moment is just a sort of diagnosis of a situation. And I think this diagnosis, this interrogation, this problematization is the first step. Is the first little manifestation of freedom. No one is asking, okay, where I am,